Welcome to the Three Championship Drive podcast on YouTube, hosted by me, Lance Caporossi. Follow me on X at Lance Caporossi, the same way you see it spelled on the screen. Do us a favor, hit the subscribe button, like the video, but more importantly, tell a Pistons fan. So we had a huge draft. I didn't think the draft would go the way that it did. It was a huge surprise to see the Pistons trade up in the second round the way that they did. Now, before we get into the players, I thought it was interesting that agents of these prospects had said, "I'm not going to let my player, the guy that I'm representing, work out for the Detroit Pistons." And I believe the reason is not because it was such a bad team last year, but because the Pistons had so many lottery picks at different positions. And I'll be honest, I really don't blame the agents for doing that. But what were your thoughts when you saw that little piece of news?
If I was your agent, I wouldn't want you to do it either, Lance. Why would I want you to go to a team that requires so much attention, requires so much talent to become a better team? Why would I want you? If I have you go and work out for the Pistons, I'm already setting you up not for success. I'm not doing my job. So I don't think there's any, I don't think you take that like as a completely like a negative thing towards your franchise with agents doing that with the people that they're working with, just because it's what are you going to tell them? Like, how are you going to be upset about that? Like, if an agent tells an organization, yeah, I don't want Ron Holland here for a workout because I want Ron Holland to be successful. And I wouldn't be wrong if if I'm your agent, that's what I'd be telling people. So it doesn't bother me because it's kind of obvious. And as a Pistons fan, knowing how shitty we are, I understand why they wouldn't want their client to go and do a pre-draft workout.
Yeah, I mean, it just it just sucks that we're in this position because I remember seeing the list on Hoops Hype. I believe it was Michael Scotto that put it up, and I was really surprised at the names that I had seen on that list. I was like, none of these guys are actually mocked to go at number 5. Like, I think the number one player that was on that list that Hoops Hype had posted. Now, this was a couple weeks ago. I think it was probably like 14 days before the draft had happened. And it was like Jacoby Walter was the best player that was on the list. And I'm like, my first thought of seeing that list was like, okay, the Pistons are probably trading back because there's no way they are drafting him with the 5th pick. I just didn't believe it. And a bunch of the guys that were on that list were mocked as like undrafted players, like guys that weren't even going to fall in even late into the second round. So I was just a little surprised, but this makes a lot more sense why agents were just saying, hey, I'm not going to have it there. I did like that Trajan Langdon. This is the thing I always appreciate about Troy Weaver too, that they didn't really let anything get out of their front office for the most part. Like there was never really any leaks. So, I mean, there's always rumors surrounding every NBA team. But with Trajan Langdon in his first year, it was so secretive of who they were going to take. We were just guessing. I mean, we did multiple episodes on who they could take with the 5th pick because there was really nothing coming out of that front office where they didn't even give us a hint of who they were going to take. Like, I mean, a few days before the draft, we were hearing names of like Matas Buzelis and Cody Williams, but Ron Holland's name was pretty. Now, I'm sure there were some people out there that, had him going 5 to Detroit. But from what we were reading, it was really just kind of, I think it really came down to between like Cody Williams and Booz Ellis, with Booz Ellis kind of taking that, being like the front man with that 5th pick.
I really hate to be that guy because as much as I want to think that with Trajan Langdon, we're going to be doing better than what we did with Troy Weaver. But Lance, like, did it ever maybe hit you upside the head saying that maybe they don't even know who the hell they're going to pick at number 5? Maybe that's why it never got leaked, because they don't have an answer. Like I watched Trajan Langdon's presser with Ron Holland, which it was good. It was good. Ron Holland, he answered the questions well, like he did a good job, but it still looked to me like maybe Trajan really wasn't sure. Like he was put in a position that Because I think, I don't know, did you watch the presser?
I did.
Okay. The biggest thing that stood out to me with them, like asking him about, hey, you've only been here for 4 weeks, and hey, I know it's a lot to go and basically reevaluate all these guys because you've been in a different organization. And what he said was, I was evaluating players for picks like 18 to 26 or something like that. That's what he brought up. And that concerned the hell out of me. It's like, yeah, we understand, like, when you were in New Orleans, like, you were a more successful team. You made the playoffs. Like, we get it. And you wouldn't have had a pick as number 5 going with the Pistons. But I don't know how you don't evaluate everybody. You know what I'm saying? Like, that was kind of a shocker to me. I didn't really like why he said that. I get the reason behind it, but as the president of basketball operations right now, like, I feel like even as in the position that he was in New Orleans, I feel like he should have evaluated everybody. I think he should have been able to take a look at everybody. So when he came to this draft, it wasn't, they didn't get blindsided by any means. They already had an idea of what kind of talent they wanted, because I think also he said that since he was in New Orleans and he was going to be drafting so late, that's when he turned to his team of his scouts and all the reps that work in that department for the Pistons. But what does that even do for us? That's the same guys that's been picking 5 for the last couple of years, man. Like, we need you to do something. We don't need you to turn to anybody. We want you to make the pick. And what the hell's going on? Like, I watched it. I didn't like it. I didn't like that comment by him. I'm not upset with the Ron Holland pick. I'm okay with it at 5. I don't care if anyone says it's a reach. I think it's a good pick. But it makes me nervous already that he's turning to his staff, which are still, some of them are still employees from the prior years with being a scout and being a part of this organization. So I don't know if what I'm saying is wrong, right, if anyone's going to take it a different way, but maybe nothing gets leaked from this organization because no one has any idea what we're going to do. Because I listened to a couple podcasts about them, people talking about how when the draft started, they were getting a bunch of phone calls for trade backs. Like, people were talking. Pistons were getting calls to move around a little bit in the draft. But once their pick came at 5, they didn't get any. And they were to the point where I think nobody wants to trade that pick. So now they were just kind of cold feet in making their decision with what they thought was their home run type hit with Ron Holland. So I don't think, maybe they didn't even know who they wanted, Lance. Maybe Trajan didn't even really know, because everything that he said made me worrisome that he was not sure, because he wasn't going to be picking in the lottery when he was at New Orleans.
You said a lot, and I really do like your opinion, and there are a few things that I do agree with you on. But the first thing is, I will say this: I don't have a problem with him trusting his guys. Like, there's a reason they're his guys. Like, he's building the front office in his way. There has to be trust and there has to be communication. Now, when it comes to trading back, he did say something. I don't know if it was the Ron Holland press conference or it was immediately after the first round when he did a press conference, because there was a video circulating where he was talking about, like, the trade offers they were getting for the 5th pick were for draft assets in this draft, and that's not something he was looking for. He didn't want more assets for this draft. He wanted to collect more future assets, and that's why he traded Quentin Grimes for Tim Hardaway in the 3 second-round picks, which we'll talk about later on in this podcast. So that's probably why, most likely why they kept the 5th pick, is because the offers really weren't in favor or what he wanted to do. Like, because remember, in his introductory press conference, he said, I'm trying to get assets for the future. So if you're not getting those, then you should just keep the 5th pick. And I do agree with you. It was, I am glad he admitted it, though, that he was like, hey, look, I only watched like 2 games at the beginning of the season because we weren't in a position in New Orleans to be drafting this high. So I do appreciate that. I do appreciate him being transparent and saying that he had a little bit of catch up. But he said it was fun to go over the film and watch it and break down these guys' tapes. I feel like he made the best selection with the 5th pick. Now, there were a bunch of times I have said, you can forget best player available and you should probably just go for fit. But again, it's a 14-win team, so I see the logic behind drafting Ron Holland, who is very much a home run, swing for the fences pick. And there's a floor and there's a ceiling to him, and hopefully in Detroit he reaches that ceiling because he could most likely be the best player out of this draft if it all clicks and works out for Ron Holland. But like I said, I do appreciate your opinion. I see where your concerns, why you have your concerns, because one, we're coming off 14 wins. This has been bad for years. This has been a disaster for, I think, like for a very long time. It sucked. So I get your concerns with the guy coming in. He didn't have a ton of prep time, but we got to trust his decisions right now because he's at least earned that much from us being the new president of basketball operations.
Yeah, with this draft too, I really thought sitting and watching that first round that when we got to 5 and Klingham was available, I really thought we were going to find a trade partner for that. I thought that somebody was going to take it, but I really think Memphis said that they were comfortable with either taking Klingham or Zach Edey, which is incredibly crazy for me to even wrap my head around that they were okay with that from a Memphis team that is so up and down the court. Like, I think they're one of the best transition teams in the NBA, and you're drafting a 7'4", your 7'4" center that's going to be trailing a lot of these plays. But I thought in the draft, I think I even texted you, it's either we're going to get Klingham or we're going to trade back because somebody I think wants this guy. And from what I saw, that the Pistons weren't getting any type of offers that they valued enough to trade that 5th pick to somebody else. Because even say they were to trade maybe for cash, Memphis that 5th pick so they could get Klingham and move back to 9. I still think I think it was 8. I think they still would have, Ron Holland still would have been available at that position. But like I said, and even you said, we don't know what goes on behind closed doors. They've made it very sure that we're not going to have a lot of that information. It's basically going to be a guessing game. But with the pick, I'm happy with the pick. There was a lot of players that you could have swung for and people wouldn't have had a problem. We've discussed that 100 times on this podcast with Montez Buzelis, a Cody Williams, a Ron Holland, a Klingham. We've been through it. So, but before we move on, I do want to ask, I know your answer to it, and I just want to talk about it a little bit because I know you were so high on him. But Dalton Knecht to 17 to the Lakers, that was crazy. I cannot believe, because we talked about Knecht being so high. And him falling all the way to 17 is absolutely ridiculous to me. And I just want to know your comments on that.
Yeah, no, I was telling Dave Dolan, the Pistons fanatic, and I'm pretty sure I was telling you that was I think it was one of the largest slides I have seen in recent memory. I think Tyrese Maxey might have been one of those guys, too, that was supposed to go in the top 10 that slid into the 20s, but I'm not sure about that. But there were so many mocks, so many big draft websites, and so many well-respected scouts that do this all year round had Dalton Knecht going number 5, and he goes to number 17. Perfect situation in LA. I mean, LA, they are the king of drafting white American players and putting them in a position to succeed. Caruso, Austin Reeves, now Dalton Knecht. It all works out. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Don't know how they figured it out, but they do. And yeah, I was torn between Dalton Knecht. I told you before, I think 5 was a little too high for him, even for what he brings to the table. Because let me ask you this: if you had to bet on what works out, Ron Holland, if you had to bet on Ron Holland figuring out his shot, which isn't completely broke, by the way, or Dalton Knecht becoming a league average defender, which would you bet on happening in the NBA?
Shoot. I only want to bet with Ron Holland becoming a better shooter just because of Troy Vincent that we picked
Brad
up.
Vincent, yeah.
Brad Vincent that we picked up. Like, that's the only reason I can see him being more successful, because say we still had the same staff as we had last year, I'm going to take my shot with Dalton Knecht, because we're not going to be able to make this rookie become a better shooter, because we've obviously shown that grooming rookies is not our really forte within the last 2 or 3 years. So I would probably bank on Ron Holland becoming a better shooter, because even with Dalton Knecht on that team, I think you can hide him a little bit on that team defensively. I think you can maneuver him enough in that roster to make it so he doesn't have to be a high-level defender. And let's face it, the Lakers aren't super high-level as defenders anywhere in the perimeter, I don't think, because you have Anthony Davis and LeBron James as your rim protectors constantly. So I think Dalton Knecht overall defensively, but offensively, he's going to be a masterpiece in LA. I think if JJ Redick actually lives up to the hype of being a good coach and being a good X's and O's guy, especially with LeBron, because we all do know that they're friends, and we all do know that the podcast that they had to do with him getting the job. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. It's a thing, and who cares? Like, it doesn't matter. But if JJ Redick can put these pieces in the right spot, Austin Reeves and Dalton Knecht, you can have them on your starting and in your off the bench squad. The Lakers, they can't screw this one up. Well, they can, but they shouldn't be able to. Like, that roster is very good.
I think Dalton Knecht and Rob Dillingham went to the absolute best situations that they could possibly go in.
Yep.
And I won't talk too much about Rob Dillingham, but being able to be on Minnesota where they can hide him defensively, kind of like what you were saying with Dalton Knecht, is so perfect.
Minnesota is my best draft of this year.
Dude, they had a good draft.
They had a very really good draft this year. And putting together I would say the swagger of Rob Dillingham with Anthony Edwards. Oh man, we're in for a show. Because Rob Dillingham, dude, he's a comedian, man. If you watch the draft, even Reed Shepherd, they asked about what their best assets are. Rob Dillingham, all he said was how good that Reed was as a player, as a facilitator, all these great things talking about basketball. And they asked Reed, he goes, "This dude's funny as hell." Like, all right, nothing about basketball. He's just really funny. And you put two comedy golds next to each other. Dude, Minnesota's going to be great. Minnesota is going to have another run this year, and Minnesota was my best pick of the draft.
Okay, so I'm going to answer this first, and I'll ask you the question. But I'm going to ask the question first. So just think about it for a second.
Okay.
So the Pistons go Ron Holland. Do you think they still try to acquire a player like Brandon Ingram, knowing that they've drafted Ron Holland? Because if you draft Brandon Ingram, I mean, if you sign Brandon Ingram or trade for him right now, which I don't think is going to happen anymore. The dream of bringing Brandon Ingram to Detroit it's dead right now. I just don't, because here's why. You draft Ron Holland, you want him to be a player, hopefully his rookie year, but you're betting on him being a player probably by like year 2 or year 3. Definitely by year 3. So if you trade for Brandon Ingram, then you sign him and say you're paying him like 40-something million a year or whatever the contract would be, you're kind of saying like, we don't really believe in Ron Holland. You're kind of like putting a handcuff on how he can grow and develop as a player in Detroit. So what do you think about that? Do you see the Pistons trading for, it doesn't have to be a Brandon Ingram, but a guy like in his mid-20s that has all-star potential, that is already a really high-level NBA player in today's game? Do you see the Pistons trading for someone like that, knowing that they drafted Ron Holland, or do you see them going more for like low-end veterans that can still play and kind of help these guys grow?
I think Trajan stated it perfectly by drafting Ron Holland at number 5, that we are not interested in grabbing any type of two-way forward in the league and in free agency, because now you have Ron Holland, which is arguably the best two-way player and one of the best defenders in this draft, and you're pairing him with Asar Thompson that also does the same thing as Ron Holland does. Like, I think they're very similar players, and they both have very high ceilings. And I think Trajan Langdon making that pick at 5 made it very clear that we're not interested in bringing a Brandon Ingram type. And I think he made it very clear of bringing in Tim Hardaway and grabbing more assets that we are looking for scorers. That's what we're looking for. And like, because we had to talk too about Gary Harris. I think another great fit would trying to reach out to grab Gary Trent Jr. I think that'd be a phenomenal pickup for Detroit. I think drafting Ron Holland was basically Trajan Langdon saying that, hey, we have our bigs, because they haven't moved on with Stewart yet. They have not. So we have our bigs of Duren and Stewart. And then now we have the wings that we want with Asar Thompson and Ron Holland. And now we did away with Quentin Grimes, because also a couple things that I heard with Quentin Grimes, I guess he expressed his feelings that he did not want to be in Detroit. So I think that was part of the reasons why we dealt him away for Tim Hardaway Jr. But who cares? We got 3 more picks out of it, so it's not like it's that big of a deal. But I think Trajan is showing that in free agency we're gonna try to get some shooters. We're gonna try to get some shooters. We're gonna try to build around these core wings, because I think it's very important nowadays to have two-way wings. Like, who just won the NBA championship? The Boston Celtics. Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown are arguably the best two-way players in the NBA, period. especially Jaylen Brown. So I think he's, when he keeps talking about what he wants to build on and how he wants to move forward, I think he's showing it right now.
Yeah, and I think that those wings, like, building up the perimeter, that's probably the most important position in basketball right now in the current NBA. Like that, those positions are just so important. But let's talk about Ron Holland. Now, this Ron Holland was the pick for the Detroit Pistons. We already all know this. It came as a surprise to many Detroit Pistons fans. I loved it. I don't think as much. I mean, I was always torn between him and Cody Williams, but like Ron Holland was the guy that I was afraid to pass on. So I'm glad it happened. And I hope he is great for the Detroit Pistons. But let's talk about the pros to his game. So there is a lot to love about Ron Holland's game. The quick burst when he heads downhill attacking the rim. It's one of my favorite things to see him do. Just that quick burst, especially when he gets like a dribble handoff and he just takes one dribble and the defenders, you can tell the defender is just like, I underestimated this guy. These long strides, that quick burst, he's at the rim in just a half second. It is incredible. The positional versatility, the guy that can potentially play 2, 3, or 4 in the NBA with his height, with his wingspan, with his body, with the physicality that he brings. I love that about his game. The motor, it just continues to run. Like you can tell this is a dude that's going to sweat in warm-ups because he's just so intense all the time. I love the motor on this kid. He's a selfless passer, capable of making quick decisions. That's something I like too. I don't think we're going to see a lot of playmaking, but you can tell there's high IQ to his game, that he's willing to pass up a good shot for a better shot. He's a strong cutter and very good at getting to the free throw line. That's something that Steve from the Res Ball Pod was talking about. I forget how many times he got to the free throw line. I'm going to look this up real quick. But what do you love about Ron Holland's game?
You said almost everything that I'm going to talk about as well. I mean,
he's got a high.
Just repeat it. He has a high motor. He's a great all around wing. He's not even 19 yet. I don't think he turned 19 yet. I think he turns 19 in a couple days. So that's good enough. That's good for this franchise. He wants to be a defensive lock. And that's super important to me. I think he went on, who was it? Kevin Garnett. He went on and he was talking to Kevin Garnett, and he asked him, was like, who are you looking forward most to guarding in the NBA? And his response was Jason Tatum. And I like that. I like that he wants to be in that position to play with the big dogs in the Eastern Conference. So that's huge. And then another thing is he's a very productive player and has a massive upside. Like, I'm just worried that we do what the Pistons have been doing for the last couple of years, and we're putting guys in positions to do more than what they're good at. And I think that's part of the reason why Ivy has been struggling as much as he has. I think that's the reason why Beef Stew struggled at first, but then slowly became to earn and understand his role on the team as being like a corner specialist type shooter, because he was not that at first, not even close. And then we're asking so much out of Cade Cunningham. So I just hope we put Ron Holland in the position that he wants to be in. Because if I may jump to the cons that I have for Ron Holland.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't think he's a complete facilitator. I think he sees the game pretty well, but I don't think he's very complete when it comes to that. And that's what we don't want to ask from him. We don't want him to be that guy. He doesn't always need to have the ball in his hands with 7 seconds left on the shot clock. We don't need that. That's why we have Cade Cunningham. So with him not being a complete facilitator, I said that he can turn the ball over in some bad situations by trying to force something that he doesn't need to do because he doesn't need to be in that role. I think it's massive. He needs to instantly work on his three-point shot. I think his percentage needs to grow. I think if he wants to be an elite player in the NBA, he needs to have a better three-point percentage, and that'll come in time. I think if you give him the reps and he wants to put in the work, I think that's huge. And then my biggest thing with Ron Holland, and I know it's not his fault, but as much as Trajan Lang, I think you know where I'm going with this. As much as Trajan Langdon talked about how he wants to be a winner and how he wants to do everything the right way, the best he can do, the best of his ability, that's great. But they won 2 games last year. Yeah, they had a young team for the G League Ignite. But you can't say he's a winner when he's won 2 games with his team. So that makes me really nervous. It's not completely his fault. I know the G League asked him to do a lot of things that he was not ready to do. Like he was underqualified for the roles that they gave him. I get it. But 2 wins in the G League Ignite scare the shit out of me. So you run with whatever you want to run off of that, but I don't like that. That doesn't impress me.
Well, he did have 114 free throw attempts in the 29 games. I wanted to share that. And I believe in the G League, you only get to attempt 1. So you could double that, and that's how many went. So he's very good at getting to the rim. The G League Ignite did not do any favors for Ron Holland and his teammates. It was a disaster. You had guys coming from high school stepping into a pro environment where typically you would have more veterans on the team to help guide them along. But instead of Ron Holland and Buzelis getting that, they were getting a team basically of guys stepping out from high school playing against pros.
It's like going to the YMCA and be like, hey, you guys good at this?
Dude, it was a disaster. So like, man, it's just so hard to for me to really like hate on his game, knowing that because I'm always going to look for the good, number one, but it's also hard for me to hate on the game, knowing that they weren't put in the best position possible to develop and grow his game. But he still had a good season. And really the only thing I wrote down was the shooting. The shooting, it's bad. 24% from 3. I want to say that it was so bad because he was creating so much of his own and he was asked to do that. Like you saw sidestep threes, you saw step back threes, you saw him shooting off the dribble and just wasn't, dude, it was bad. It was bad. I mean, the jumper doesn't look broke to me. There's definitely some things he can work on, and I'm glad that Trajan Langdon talked about that. And I believe he said he talked to Fred Vinson about it. So when we talked about that on the podcast, that was huge. That made me feel really good. But I think he said that he talked to Fred Vinson and said, "Can you work with this kid?" And basically gave him the green light. So yeah, I can. It's going to be good. But the other thing that the one other kind of his game is, I've already said it, it's created his own shot. He struggles to create his own shot. If he's not getting downhill and attacking the rim, he really doesn't dance with a defender. So that's why I'm glad he's moving to a team with a Cade Cunningham where he can play more to his strengths, like cutting to the basket, moving without the ball, doing those type of things. That is something that I'm excited for, at least offensively, to play with a guy like that. And hopefully they sign a coach that puts these guys in the best position to maximize their strengths. But let's talk about Bobi Klintman. Now, this is a dude, unless you have anything more to say about Ron Holland, but let me just talk about this guy just for a brief second. A 6'10" wing with a near 7-foot wingspan. He might be my favorite pick of these two. And believe me, I love Ron Holland, but I really like Trey Murphy's game. And I'm not comparing Bobi Klintman outright to Trey Murphy, but obviously seeing 6'10", can stroke it, kind of like what you see, kind of like what you want from a wing player. This draft pick excites me a ton. What do you think about Bobi Klintman? Just like the initial thought of him when he was drafted by the Detroit Pistons, because you called me right afterwards pretty much.
Yeah, I like the size. I think the size is going to be huge. I think he needs to put on a little bit of weight, but not a lot, because he's going to be more of a wing guy. I think for us, he's not going to be really one that's guarding a 5 position at all. I don't know about him making that open and roster. I think maybe he'll be someone to go and play in the G League for a little bit before they move him into a position where he's going to be on the Pistons. But I think with a lot of upside, Klintman was a really good pick and a good move up for. And plus we didn't lose really anything for it. So I loved this pick as well. I didn't really get to watch a whole lot of Bobi Klintman. He wasn't anything on my radar by any means, and I don't know why he was not. When I watched his tape, very active hands. He's defensively, he's usually always in the right position of jumping in the way of passes. He always loves to play the passing lane. He's very fast for his size, and it finishes very well at the rim. If you leave him open, he's going to knock it down. And I think he also moves really well without the ball. So if you have this guy on this roster with a Ron Holland, a Jaden Ivey, a Sar Thompson, even a Jalen Duren, letting Cade be able to kind of do what he wants, I think you are going to have a lot of lobs at the rim with a lot of these guys. So with the pick, I really like the size. Like I said, I think he needs to gain a little bit more weight to be into the NBA. But I think it was a really good pick and a really smart move up for them.
Dude, it was when I saw that trade come through, I was blown away because I'm like, dude, Wendell Moore Jr. really, and the 37th pick. Usually, the Detroit Pistons are sending a player out and multiple picks just to move up or
Yeah.
something like that. It was awesome to see that Trajan Langdon was actually doing something he said he was going to do in the press conference, which was collect an asset or two. But anyways, I like him because again, 6'10" with a near 7-foot wingspan, stretch big, with a good feel to find space in the defense to get a shot off, which he has a very high release. It's clean. There's no hitch. The jump shot is just smooth from the catch to release. I mentioned that he's good at finding space for a shot, but he's also really good at cutting to the rim. I love watching the highlights. I'm mainly focused on his offense and just seeing what he can provide. Like, this guy could be a very good spot up shooter. I believe he shot like 35 or 36% from three and 39% on his catch and shoot. So just a good outlet for a Cade Cunningham and a Jaden Ivey for them to find along the perimeter. He's very good in transition, like you were saying. He seems like he's always beating the defense down for easy buckets, which is something that you love to see. Still young at 21 years old, but one of the oldest players already on the Detroit Pistons. But those are the things I loved about his game. I love that also that he knew how to use his length defensively. That was something that was really nice too. Like, he got a hand in the face. But again, there's not really much to dislike about his game for being a second round pick. But I'll talk about some of the cons right now. He was a little inconsistent shooting the ball. Even though he had good percentages, he had more highlight games where he had big numbers. I mean, he had a few of those sprinkled in with just like a lot of inconsistent play. Like, you didn't see the same thing from him every single night. And I mentioned his length and how he could use it defensively. The problem is, defensively, he is a little stiff, and it seemed like guys were beating him to spots, and he was just quick to recover, which is not something I like to see. That's something that's going to have to be cleaned up. And then he can put the ball on the floor, but he's, again, not much of a isolation shot creator or anything like that. And despite his size at 6'10", he's not really physical at the rim. It seems kind of like he likes to avoid contact. But again, second round pick at 37. So again, I love a lot to his game. There is quite a few things to dislike about his game, but I do agree with you. I don't think he's going to be on the opening day roster. I think he's going to be a G League player. So when the Crews play the Gold, we'll have to go to Grand Rapids and go watch him play live. We'll have to go do that.
Yeah, that would be a lot of fun. I'd totally be down to go and catch some of those games. Maybe we should wait until Jaden Ivey's on the G League too, and then we can just go. I'm just kidding. So for my cons with Klintman is, I already said it. I think he needs to add a little bit more weight. I don't think he's heavy enough set right now to be able to hold his own, because he's already kind of slow on defense. So we don't need someone that's getting beat and bullied at the same time. So I think he needs to, from a physical aspect, but I mean, that's going to come with being in the league. He's going to be with trainers and be able to grow. I mean, everyone saw what they did with Giannis. Giannis was the smallest human being on the planet, and now he's a monster. And even Chet Holmgren has gained a lot of weight too. So I'm not worried about the size thing. That's just going to come within the next year or so. One thing that I really did notice is his jump shot is very slow. Like, I think him and Isaiah Stewart both have the same speed of a jump shot. Like, it allows defenses to close out. Now, I don't think he doesn't get a lot of those shots blocked or really contested that well because he is 6'10". So his release point is on some Wembanyama stuff. Like, it's really hard to contest that shot. So I think his size really helps. And then another thing that I noticed too is, like, yeah, he's really good in transition, but he also really likes to pull up and settle for 3-point attempts too in transition. And I don't know if we're bringing on guys like Jaden Ivey and Ron Holland, Cade Cunningham, and Sar Thompson. I don't think that's going to fit really well because those guys are runners. I don't see a guy stopping and pulling up for three a couple of times. But I mean, then again, with this game, it can always grow. Trajan has proven to us that he is very, very in on grooming these rookies and working with these young guys to make them build into something better. So, but with Klintman, I mean, we even talked. I mean, I was going to love the Kyle Filipowski fall to 37. I was hoping that was going to happen. It didn't, because I didn't know why he was getting falling off people's boards until I learned why he was falling off people's boards. We won't get it. Just Google it. We won't get into that. But I think for 37, I think it was a great pick. And I would love to go and watch this guy grow in the G League.
Yeah, and that's how that is where I'm keeping my expectations. I'm keeping him and saying, like, I'm not going to talk about him like he's going to be starting for the Pistons and he's going to be the stretch four that we so desperately need. I hope he becomes that, because I want to see every guy that the Pistons draft succeed. Like, I would love to see that. I do like that Trajan Langdon said, look, I'm going for upside. I'm sticking to the New Orleans plans. I'm going for two wings with upside that offer a skill in the modern NBA. And that's what you're getting with Bobi Klintman. Like, you're getting a guy that can potentially play the 3 or the 4, most likely the 4 if he figures it out in the NBA. Another thing that might work against him is if he really doesn't develop a lot more consistency with his shot, it would be very hard for him to really find a role on the team, because he does not have elite skills in very many other areas when it comes to his game. Like, the shooting has to click and it has to be consistent for him to have a long NBA career. But again, I'm not going to talk about him like he's going to be the savior of this franchise. Like, I don't want to do that, but I do want to talk about him in the sense that this could very well be a good pick in terms of a rotation piece for the Detroit Pistons, but it's going to take some time. I fully expect to see him in the G League. I expect Trajan Langdon to sign a few more people in free agencies, maybe make another trade where this guy will be buried on the bench, and that is totally fine with me. Unless he just decides to kill it in summer league, then I'm going to be like super excited to watch this guy play in the NBA. Yeah. But Bobi Klintman and Ron Holland, welcome to the Detroit Pistons. So the Detroit Pistons have traded Quentin Grimes to the Dallas Mavericks for Tim Hardaway Jr. and 3 second-round picks. So we're going to break down this trade just real quick for you guys if you haven't heard. So there's 3 second-round picks, 2025 second-round pick via Toronto, which that excites me a little bit, because as you continue to add more players with bigger contracts on this team, those second-round picks become a little bit more valuable because they allow you to manipulate the cap space a little bit more with those second-round picks. And a second-round pick in next year's draft, which most likely is going to be in the 30s, that's going to be really valuable whether you draft a player or whether you use it in a trade. And then they're getting 2 2028 second-round picks from the Dallas Mavericks. So Tim Hardaway Jr., he has $16 million left on his contract. He's a career 36% three-point shooter on 6.3 attempts per game. My thoughts on the trade initially were, I'm sad to see Quentin Grimes go, because I really did like his two-way play, and I thought he would be the perfect complement to Cade Cunningham in the backcourt. Unfortunately, there's some injury concerns. He only played 6 games. He struggled to find his shot even in those 6 games. Now, we can blame that on injury or whatever, but he shot pretty well with New York before he was traded. But also, it said to me that the Detroit Pistons and Trajan Langdon, they didn't view him to be a part of this future in Detroit. Like, it tells me that they are still really invested in Jaden Ivey, Marcus Sasser, Asar Thompson. They're invested in those guys, and they want to see, even though they're bringing veterans, they want to get minutes for those guys to see how they fit alongside Cade Cunningham and see if those guys can grow and be long-term pieces for this team. What were your thoughts on the trade? I know you hate Tim Hardaway Jr., though.
Easy with the H word, man. Easy with the H word. I just don't completely like the trade, just because of the fact that we're losing a lot of defense in this trade. Now, that's the only reason why I'm not so high on it. Now, last year, 79 games with Dallas. He only started 12, so he'd most likely – I mean, I don't know if he would start in Detroit. But I will say this. from what I heard with Quentin Grimes not wanting to be in Detroit and having Tim Hardaway come to Detroit, I think that could be a really good start, like a fresh start for him. Because I know that we talked about like a Miles Bridges coming to Detroit and having his little fresh start and maybe turning out to be what we all want him to be. Tim Hardaway still shoots the ball at a 35-36% clip from three. And that's without having Vincent on staff to help him shoot better. I don't have a problem with bringing him in. I don't know if he's going to be a starter for this team. It does make me nervous. I would like him to come off the bench, but then again, I don't want Ivy to start next to Cade. So I don't know how we're going to handle this. But if he comes off the bench, Lance, depending on the season we have and the numbers he put up, he could be a 6 man of the year contender. I really do think that it's possible. Because I think he can, if we bring him onto a team that we're strictly wanting him to shoot the ball, like, hey, shoot the ball, shoot 8 threes a game. We don't care. Like, go for it. You're going to be in for X amount of minutes. This is what we want you to do for this team. And if you're playing well, then you're obviously going to get more minutes and you're going to shoot more shots. So I just don't like it because of losing Quentin Grimes as a defender. But if you don't have a guy that's also bought into what you want to do in Detroit and it's already maybe causing issues that he doesn't even want to play there, bringing in a guy like Tim Hardaway and gaining a lot of assets for second-round picks, I think that was probably in the best interest of Detroit to do. So, I mean, granted, I don't know whether how true it was if Quentin Grimes was toxic within the environment of the locker room. I don't know if he was telling his agent, why am I here? I don't want to do this. I think it worked out. I think it worked out good for both teams because I think Tim Hardaway is going to give a little bit more leeway on this team instead of playing around a Luka and a Kyrie, but will be set around Cade, that he has the opportunity to shoot the ball really as much as he wants to here.
Yeah, ideally, I think he should start because I would like to see Jaden Ivey still get reps as a point guard with the second unit and playing alongside Marcus Sasser and probably Simone Fontecchio or something. I mean, like, if they bring him off the bench, they bring him off the bench. It's not going to be that big of a deal. He's a guy that can create his own shot. When he's hot, he's hot. When he's cold, he's cold. He is a little streaky. He's been a 6 man of the year candidate 4 times in his career. 3 times he's been voted inside the top 10, coming in 5th place in his second full season in Dallas. And again, like, not really a big time move like I think some Pistons fans thought. I mean, I thought myself they were going to bring in, again, someone like Brandon Ingram, like with one of these trades with all the cap space they've had. But $16 million on 1 year with a guy that, again, can shoot, that shoots 36% for his career. 2 seasons, in his first 2 full seasons in Dallas, he shot 39.8 and 39.1% in Dallas. Like, this dude, he can really shoot the ball. He's a guy that's going to create a lot of space. He's going to take some attention away because you have to game plan for this guy. So it's what Trajan Langdon said. We're making Cade Cunningham's life a little bit easier. And that's what you're going to get with Tim Hardaway Jr. I know some people were comparing it to the Joe Harris trade, but dude, Joe Harris was coming to Detroit with multiple injuries. Yeah. Like, he came off a couple of surgeries and yeah, he was getting paid a little bit more, but he was like, what he provided to a team was he was a shooter. He was primarily just a shooter. There was nothing else to his game. Tim Hardaway brings a little bit more than that. And I think he's still better than Alec Burks. I mean, like, I see the comparison some Pistons fans are making between those two players. I just think Tim Hardaway's a better player and brings something that Alec Burks doesn't, which is a veteran with winning experience in the NBA. I mean, he was just in the NBA Finals. I get he didn't have a huge role, but I mean, this guy can really play, and I think this is I mean, it's not a huge upgrade, but it is a big upgrade at that guard position alongside Cade Cunningham. I mean, I'm all for this trade.
Yeah, and I know that he's from Florida, but he did play 3 years at Michigan. So maybe him coming back to Michigan be good for him, maybe for his family. I'm not sure what his situation is. But another thing, too, I want to bring up, Lance, as well, is this could be a really smart move when it comes to trade value. Because say Tim Hardaway comes to the Pistons and he has a great year, dude. Say he's averaging 18 points a game. Like he's shooting, like he's making 4 or 5 threes a game. Like he's having a good year with Detroit. But overall, maybe we have 13 or 14 wins when it comes to the trade deadline. He could be an asset, man. I think this was bringing a guy on that could maybe gain trade value for us in the future. Like bring him to a team that's struggling, and then we could end up trading him to a contender that we could maybe gain a little bit more for a draft, or maybe get more prospects or bring more people in that we want. So at the end of the day, I don't think this is a bad idea for Detroit to bring in. I don't think it's going to hurt anything, dude. We're a 14-win team, so really, who gives a shit at this point? Like whatever we want to bring in, let's bring it in and let's give it a try, dude. And I think we're going to run with it. And I don't want him to start. I'd rather him come off the bench. I really would. But that would require us to reach out and maybe grab somebody else, because we still have a lot of cap space available.
Yeah, we do. And I think there's going to be more shooting, whether it's Tobias Harris or someone else. And if you bring in Tobias Harris on a fair contract, like even if you got to pay him around $20 million, I'm totally fine with that. That guy's like a 20-point scorer in the NBA. He becomes one of he's not going to lead the team in scoring, but he becomes a second option behind Kane Cunningham. But before we move on, in 30 games last year, the first 30 games of the NBA season, Tim Hardaway Jr. averaged 17.9 points per game while shooting 36% from three on 9.2 attempts per game.
That's what we're asking.
Exactly.
That's what we're looking for in this. And I can already guarantee you that was the phone call that Trajan or met in person with him, told him, like, that's all I would do is just highlight those 30 games and put it on a piece of paper and hand it to him. This is what we need from you. This is what I want. We don't care. Shoot the ball. This is what we want. We're going to try to give you the opportunity to be this Tim Hardaway Jr. And if he can hit that ceiling, because I think that is his ceiling, is averaging 19 points a game. I don't think he's really anything more than that. If he can do that, then that's a huge win for us getting rid of Quentin Grimes. So we'll see what happens. I know that he's here to do that job, is to be a bucket getter, is to provide something that we don't have right now. And hopefully even being a successful shooter maybe rubs off on the rookies as well.
Well, Cade Cunningham, before he had his surgery for his shins, he reached out to Tim Hardaway Jr., who had a surgery, and told him, hey, man, it made the pain went away. So, I mean, like, Cade obviously trusts this guy and I don't know if you'd say looks up to him, but as a guy that he trusts to reach out and get information from and to kind of talk about things. I'm sure they have had conversations before. That's kind of huge too in itself. So James Borrego, he is staying in New Orleans, and he has removed himself from consideration for the Detroit Pistons vacant head coaching job. This game's from Chris Haynes. Adrian Wojnarowski reported Borrego had become a prominent candidate for the Pistons opening after the Cavaliers had hired Kenny Atkinson. Because if you remember, the coaching hire really started to gain some steam after what Cleveland was doing. Cleveland was a much hotter job than the Detroit Pistons, and some more available candidates some candidates would have become more available once that head coaching job had been filled. I mean, I'm a little disappointed. I wanted James Borrego in Detroit. I liked what he did in New Orleans, winning 43 games, having the 8th best offense, 6th in three-point percentage. I really liked what he could have brought to a team, a little bit of offensive creativity. Now, there's 3 names that have been linked to the Detroit Pistons vacancy. That is Sean Sweeney, the Dallas Mavericks assistant, Minnesota Timberwolves assistant Mike Inori, and former Cavaliers head coach JB Bickerstaff. You were already telling me you think it's going to be Sean Sweeney. That's who you're leaning towards taking over this vacancy. I like Mike Inori. But what are your thoughts on the difference between do you think it matters if it's a first-year head coach or a guy that has head coaching experience, or does that not matter to you at all?
The only thing that I wrote down, highlighted, bold, italicized, anything that you can do on this Google document is, can we stop hiring coaches that are getting fired from other teams? That's what I put down, and that's what I'm tired of. I don't care if Dwayne Casey won Coach of the Year and he got fired. We hired him. It didn't work. Like Monty Williams got fired. We hired him. Steve Van Gundy got fired. We hired him. Let's get somebody in here that didn't lose his job, like JB Bickerstaff. Let's not do that. Can we please shy away from this? I don't care. JJ Redick was coaching fourth graders, and he has a job now. So who cares at this point? If we're going to get an assistant coach, we're going to get an assistant coach. Just stop hiring a guy that obviously wasn't clear cut for an organization to bring into a failing organization at the moment, because that's not something we need. I like the Sean Sweeney fit because I think Sean Sweeney is the offense that Dallas is running. I'm not going to say it's similar, but how they like to space the floor and shoot the ball, I think that's kind of where we're trying to bring up pieces to this team. So I like Sean Sweeney more than Micah Nori and Sean Sweeney, and maybe they talk to Tim Hardaway Jr. and be like, hey, what do you think? Like, I liked him. Like, if I liked him, if they were good, they were on good basis, then why would you not bring him in? We're not saying Tim Hardaway Jr. is going to be the MVP this year, but I mean, an opinion matters if he likes this guy as a head coach or not. So I think Sean Sweeney be a better fit. I still do like Micah Nori because Micah Nori is honest. They're a successful team, and he's been around a successful program this year. And he was a part of a rebuild with Minnesota and bringing on pieces and trying to put them together to fit a perfect puzzle. So either way, with Sean Sweeney or Micah Nori, I don't really have a huge difference. I mean, I still think we really do need to find a head coach. I think this needs to be done here at some point, because we got basketball coming up within 15 days of them going and playing. So I think we need to kind of get this figured out. But JB Bickerstaff, no, that is my answer to that is no. Like, I'm tired of bringing in guys that are losing jobs and then we're just giving them a job. That's not how that should work.
So Micah Nori and Sean Sweeney, I don't know if you know this, but they were actually part of Dwayne Casey's, with the Detroit Pistons for a couple of seasons.
Correct.
I'm actually perfectly fine with either of these guys. Again, I really wanted James Borrego. I wanted some guy with some head coaching experience, but I don't want JB Bickerstaff because even though I've said this before, even though he's had success with other teams, those other teams felt like, hey, you know what? We can dump this guy because he's not a guy that can deliver us to a championship. I'm not saying Sean Sweeney or Micah Nori could do that, but they do come with, like, they are very well respected in the NBA. You can look these guys up and you can read about them, especially Sean Sweeney, who this is a guy too that I am interested in because I like the player development thing. And that's what Trajan Langdon wants in a coach. He wants a guy that's passionate about development and wants to develop players. That's what you're getting in Sean Sweeney. Now he's more defensive minded, which, dude, I mean, in the NBA, the way offense is being played, I'd rather go with an offensive mind. So maybe when Sean Sweeney comes in, maybe he really does focus on the development and everything like that. But hopefully he brings some strong assistants that can do the other stuff, like, cater to these guys' strengths offensively. The reason I would give the slight edge to Micah Nori is that he does have experience with some head coaching when he filled in for Chris Finch, but also he is known as a guy that does make good late game adjustments, which is something that we don't know if Sean Sweeney can do. And that's something the Pistons haven't had with Dwayne Casey or Monty Williams. Like, every fan, whatever your level of knowledge when it comes to basketball, saw that watching those teams coached by Dwayne Casey and Monty Williams. We saw terrible late game adjustments throughout the entire season. So Micah Nori, that might be a fresh of breath air. So that's why I'm leaning towards him. And that is the biggest thing. And, like, I feel like he'll still be fine with developing players and everything. I don't know that about him, but, like, you were right. He did step into a rebuilding situation, but Tim Conley had a bunch of veterans on those rosters. So I don't know how well he would do with a young team. I feel like Sean Sweeney would be good with a young team, getting them to a certain point. But I feel like if you're really looking for a head coach, Micah Nori might be the best fit for the Detroit Pistons.
Yeah, and I think I read too with Micah Nori as well, as he was in charge of substitutions as well when it came to dishing out minutes for these guys from Minnesota. And I think that's one thing that Monty Williams was so good at. If you're watching YouTube, you're seeing me not be serious with this. Monty Williams was horrible with that. So maybe we get a guy in that knows how to rotate guys and knows how to put X's and O's together, like who Cade should be playing with in the last 4 minutes of a game, or when you said late game adjustments, that also comes down with late game drawn up plays with 7-8 seconds left in the game, or being just a smart coach in general, whether you want to foul or not at the end of a game, or you want to press at the end of a game. So I think maybe Mike and Nori would also, I mean, they're both good candidates. They're both really good candidates. But I'm going to stand by that. We need to do it soon. Like we just need to get it done. So these players, I mean, how are they supposed to develop when they don't even know who the hell they're developing for? So let's get a guy in that wants to teach these guys how he wants to run a team, because we don't have that right now. We just have Trajan saying we're gonna develop these guys. Well, woohoo! Like, so we got to figure out a game plan. It's got to get done. It has to be. I feel like it just needs to be treated right now, since the draft is over and everything is taken care of, and they made the picks that they wanted to pick. I think now, other than free agents, they need to get on board with getting a head coach signed.
No, I agree. It needs to happen soon. Like, you need. So I hope it happens this week. I hope it happens. I hope it's already happened while we're recording this. Like, yeah. I'm fine with getting the breaking news at this very second, so we can still talk about it.
With James Borrego, do you think a part of him staying was DeJounte Murray going over to New Orleans?
Oh, I think that's a huge part of it, but also I think, man, with Willie Green too, I think it has a little bit to do with that. I'm not going to say he's on the hot seat in New Orleans, but maybe James Borrego is like, there's a chance that I
be the man up next.
Yeah, like exactly. And
they're building they're building a really good roster right now.
Yes.
So if I could see that happening, they pull. Well, I won't say they pull a Doc Rivers, because they should have never fired in Milwaukee to bring on Doc Rivers, because the record was, I think, like 35-10, so it wasn't even that bad. But like I see what you're talking about. Is this guy's like, well, if Willie drops the ball here and we start the season 20-10. With a roster that they have with DeJounte Murray, Brandon Ingram, Zion Williamson, they can't screw this up right now. Najee Marshall, their team is very good. Like, I think their roster is like at least top 5 roster in the NBA right now. And I think that I think you're completely right. I think he's waiting on maybe something to fall there. And I even think as management, I think they know, and maybe conversations have already been had. Like, hey, bro, if you stay here, if something happens, like, I don't know. All right, sounds good. I guess I'm not going to leave to a 14-win team.
Yep. I think that might be the case more for James Borrego. You have DeJounte Murray coming to New Orleans. You finally get that point guard. Zion Williamson had a healthy season. He looked great.
Looked great.
And, maybe New Orleans has doubts about Willie Green as the head coach. And maybe Trajan brings in Willie Green to be the head coach to Detroit, where he's from Detroit, played college in Detroit.
Stop hiring guys that have been fired from jobs. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm going to say. That's all I want. I don't even care.
So before we end, real quick, Evan Fournier, his team option was not picked up. So that's $19 million. I believe that the Pistons, there was some tweet by Adrian Wojnarowski saying they haven't picked, they're declining his team option. Now they have $50 million in cap space. So I think it bumped it up after the Tim Hardaway trade. So that's nice. Still plenty of money. The Buddy Boeheim era is over in Detroit. Stanley Amude, his option has been declined. Metu, his option has been declined. Pretty much every guy that Troy Weaver signed is no longer in Detroit. Crazy era to be a part of, and I'm glad we get to witness it. But that is the show. Thank you guys for listening to the 3 Championship Drive podcast. Do us a favor, go to Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Hit the follow button. After you hit the follow button, rate with 5 stars, and tell us how you feel about Ron Holland and Bobi Klintman becoming Detroit Pistons. But more importantly, tell a Pistons fan